Have you ever asked yourself, why did they only start caring when I was gone? You gave your all, your presence, your love, your loyalty, without hesitation, thinking that one day it would be enough. But instead of gratitude, you were met with silence. You waited, hoped, stayed, and still they acted like you'd never leave. Sound familiar? Because here's a brutal truth most people don't talk about. Some won't recognize your worth until your absence is louder than your presence ever was. It's one of the most painful revelations in love, and yet one of the most empowering. This video is not just about heartbreak. It's about the Stoic path to healing, about how your silence became your strength, about why your absence is now haunting them more than your love ever reached them. And if you're here watching this, then maybe you've felt that ache, the kind where your heart whispers, "Was I ever enough?" But what if I told you the issue was never about your worth? It was about their blindness. Let's get one thing straight. This isn't a pity party. This isn't about playing the victim. In fact, let's challenge one of the most popular myths. In relationships, the idea that the more you give, the more they'll love you. That your loyalty, your forgiveness, your unwavering presence will eventually melt their indifference. But what if that belief is the very thing keeping you stuck in pain? What if they didn't value you not because you were too much, but because you made it too easy to take you for granted? And now, here's where the shift happens, because when you finally walked away, not with rage, but with clarity, they didn't expect it. You broke the pattern. You stopped bleeding for someone who kept handing you the knife, and that silence? That choice to stop explaining, to stop chasing, to stop making excuses for them, it echoed louder than any fight you ever had. This is a wake-up call, not just for them, but for you. It's a reminder of what Stoicism teaches us, that emotional control, peace, and self-respect are not passive. They are power. You are not weak for walking away. You are strong because you did. And now they're the ones haunted by the quiet you left behind. This journey isn't about revenge. It's about realization, transformation, the kind that starts when you stop waiting for someone else to validate what you've always known deep down, that you are worthy of a love that doesn't require suffering. So let's take a hard look at what's really happening on their side now, why it's hitting them so late, why your absence is echoing where your presence was once ignored. What follows are 7 Stoic truths, woven through the psychology of emotional distance and the powerful reawakening of self-worth. Stay with me because, number 1, it's not what they thought you were doing, it's what you were actually becoming. 1. They thought you were waiting, but you were healing. They thought your silence meant weakness, that your stillness was a sign you were frozen in pain, sitting by the phone, replaying the past like a loop you couldn't escape. But the truth is, while they imagined you paused in longing, you were deep in the quiet work of becoming. You see, when someone leaves assuming you'll always be right there, it's because they never truly saw you as someone who could change. They saw you as fixed, dependent, always reaching. And so when you went quiet, when you stopped calling, stopped asking, stopped appearing where you used to, they assumed it was just a phase. In their story, you were the one who always stayed, who forgave, who bent just enough to keep things from breaking. But what they didn't realize was that you weren't sitting still, you were repairing. You were remembering who you were before the confusion, before the gaslighting, before the erosion of your emotional landscape by someone who only saw you through the lens of what you could give. While they distracted themselves with noise, with flings, with ego strokes, you were cutting ties with a version of yourself that begged for breadcrumbs. And healing, real healing, isn't always beautiful. It's not candles and mantras and perfectly captioned Instagram quotes. Sometimes it's screaming into pillows, crying at red lights, sleeping through alarms, and staring into the mirror, wondering when you forgot your own face. But you did it. You picked yourself up in moments no one else saw. You walked through fire without a witness, and now the smoke is clearing. What they can't fathom is that your silence was not submission. It was strategy. A stoic retreat inward, not to escape, but to rebuild the fortress that was once raided by someone who had no idea how sacred your presence was. In Stoic relationships, power doesn't come from loud ultimatums or dramatic exits. It comes from detachment rooted in self-respect. And you practiced that day by day, minute by minute. You didn't ghost them, you grew out of them, out of needing them to wake up, to finally care, to suddenly see your worth. Because worth is not something granted by someone else, it's something you reclaim. And so while they were watching for signs of the old you, the one who used to double text, the one who would spiral at every cold reply, you were already miles ahead in your journey. You were rediscovering peace, not in their arms, but in your own strength. And that is where Stoicism enters this story, not as a rejection of emotion, but as the mastery of it. You didn't stop loving them out of spite. You stopped because loving them hurt more than losing them. You stopped because their version of love required you to abandon yourself. And that's not love, that's survival, the kind that bleeds. Your joy dry while you try to keep something one-sided alive. They expected you to be stuck in the story they wrote for you, but you grabbed the pen back. You tore out the chapters that no longer fit, and you started writing from truth, and now they're confused, because in their head, healing looks like a performance, posting pictures, trying to make them jealous, seeking validation from the outside. But you weren't performing, you were purging. You were cleaning emotional wounds, not covering them up with new distractions. You were learning to be whole again, without the echo of their name in every heartbeat. This is where the tables turn, not because you set out to prove something, but because you finally understood you had nothing left to prove. They thought you were lingering, but what they're realizing now, as the weeks turn into months and the messages stay unread, is that the quiet they once dismissed has become the loudest reminder of what they lost. Because silence is not always empty. Sometimes it's filled with everything they chose to ignore, your effort, your loyalty, your unconditional heart. And in that silence, their mind starts to race. Were you always this strong? Did they ever really know you? Did they mistake your softness for fragility, when it was really fortitude? These questions haunt them not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. That's the Stoic power of restraint. It speaks in absence, it teaches in withdrawal. And now they're left with echoes of laughter that no longer fills their phone, of support that no longer cushions their ego, of care they believed would always be available. They scroll through your social media, hoping to see pain, to read your posts like open wounds. But instead, they see peace. They see a glow they never nurtured, a presence they never held properly. And it stings, not because they want to fix it, but because they realize they never truly had it. They only had access to a version of you that was fighting to be loved. And that version is gone, buried, replaced with someone who doesn't chase closure, who doesn't argue for clarity, who doesn't need to be seen to know they're visible. That's what Stoic relationships teach us, that we are not defined by who we lose, but by how we rise. And your rise wasn't explosive, it was steady, it was disciplined, it was earned in silence. While they were counting the days until your return, you were counting the lessons. You were learning not to take crumbs when you deserve the whole table. You were learning that loyalty should not be tested, and that emotional availability is not a currency to be traded. It's a gift to be cherished. And now they feel it. In the quiet moments when the crowd leaves, when the distractions wear thin, when they're alone and their mind pulls up memories like unwanted dreams, that's when they realize you weren't waiting. You were walking, and not toward them, but toward yourself. That's what they never expected, because in their eyes, love is control, emotion is leverage, and presence is possession. But in Stoicism, love is offered freely, but never at the cost of self. Emotion is felt but not indulged. Presence is a gift, not a guarantee. And so here you are, not watching the door, not clinging to the past, but building something sacred in the silence they never knew how to respect. Yourself. Stronger, wiser, calmer. Not because they changed, but because you did. And that shift, that rebirth, that evolution, that's what's hitting them now. Not your departure, but your transformation. 2, they didn't notice when you needed them most. There's a specific kind of ache that comes not from betrayal, but from neglect, from standing next to someone who claims to care while slowly fading into the background of your own story. You were right there, smiling, checking in, trying to bridge the growing gap with soft words and open hands. But they didn't see you, not really. Maybe they thought you were strong enough to carry it all. Maybe they assumed that just because you weren't screaming, you weren't suffering. But that's where they were wrong, because while you held the relationship together with invisible threads, they were too distracted, too self-involved, or maybe just too indifferent to recognize that you were unraveling. And this is where the misunderstanding cuts deepest. They saw your good morning texts, your thoughtful check-ins, your late-night conversations as routine, not as effort, not as love, not as survival. They mistook your consistency for convenience, your patience for passivity. And so, when your energy dimmed, when your responses slowed, when your smile started to falter, they didn't ask why. They didn't reach. They didn't adjust. That's emotional neglect, not just what someone does, but what they consistently fail to do. You kept pouring from your cup even when it was bone dry, hoping that one day they'd finally pour back. But love that flows only in one direction becomes a drought. And in that drought, you were wilting while they danced in the comfort of your care. You tried to speak, maybe not with words, but with tone, with sighs, with quiet moments that begged to be noticed, but they didn't hear you. They didn't see you folding into yourself just to stay close. They didn't ask why you looked tired, why you no longer lit up around them, why your laughter seemed muted. And what hurt most wasn't just the silence, it was the assumption that you were fine, that you'd always bounce back, that you didn't need the same love you were so freely giving, and so you stopped trying, not out of spite but out of necessity, out of the deep, exhausting realization that trying to connect with someone who refuses to meet you halfway is like shouting into the wind. You go hoarse long before they ever hear you. This is where Stoicism sharpens into clarity, because it teaches us not to chase what consistently rejects our presence. It tells us that true strength is not in how long you can hold on, but in when you finally decide to let go. And you did. Not all at once, but gradually. You stopped initiating. You stopped fixing the mood. You stopped being the emotional caretaker of a connection that left you starving for reciprocity. And they noticed, but not in the way you hoped. They didn't notice your pain. They noticed the withdrawal of benefits. They missed your emotional labor, not your well-being. They missed the version of you that made their life easier, not the person inside that was hurting. And that realization, that's what burns them now. Because as the Stoic relationship dynamic teaches, people often don't value emotional support until it's gone. And now, in the quiet you left behind, they're replaying your gestures, your sacrifices, your consistency. Only now does it register how much effort you were putting in just to hold things steady. Only now do they realize they were never meeting you at the same depth. And it's too late. Because the person who once stood there, smiling through silent tears, is no longer available to be ignored. You've stepped away, not with vengeance, but with wisdom. And that's the part they'll never fully understand, how the most powerful healing doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it's a slow fading of presence, a gradual reclaiming of peace, a decision, moment by moment, to stop explaining your pain to someone committed to misunderstanding it. And now, as they sit in the silence they once overlooked, they begin to panic. They search for signs that you still care, hoping for a crack in your composure. But Stoicism teaches us to be rooted in our own worth, to respond to emotional negligence, not with pleading, but with presence, our own. You didn't go cold, you got clear. And clarity is often mistaken for cruelty by those who benefited from your confusion. So now they ask mutual friends about you. They scroll through your social media late at night, looking for the version of you that used to chase. But that version no longer exists. That version gave too much and received too little. That version cried in silence while they laughed in comfort. And now that version has evolved, not into someone bitter, but into someone free. You're not trying to make them regret it. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just done. Done begging for attention. Done arguing for your worth. Done explaining why you deserve the bare minimum of emotional awareness. They didn't notice when you needed them most. And that is something they will carry longer than your presence ever lingered. Because regret hits hardest when it meets silence, when there's no more fight left to give. When the person who once kept the light on decides to walk away, not with fanfare, but with finality. And if you've ever been in this space, if you've ever held onto someone who couldn't even see your hands reaching, then you know this. Pain. You know the numbness that comes after the storm, the relief that replaces hope, the quiet pride of choosing yourself after all the times you weren't chosen. That is your rebirth. That is the moment you begin again. And as you sit in that silence, know this: you were never too much. You were asking too little from someone who couldn't give more. And now the silence is yours, sacred, stoic, strong. If this part of the journey resonated with you, like and comment #1 below to let us know. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that guide you back to your strength through the lens of Stoicism and Stoic relationships. You're not alone, and you're not stuck. This is just the beginning of your return to yourself. 3. They didn't expect you to outgrow the pain. They never imagined you would outgrow the pain. In their mind, the hurt they left you with was supposed to keep you trapped, emotionally stunted, endlessly circling the same memories like a ghost in your own past. They believed that by walking away, by distancing themselves without closure, without explanation, without even the decency of acknowledgement, they could freeze you in time. They thought your heart would stay exactly where they left it, beating in confusion, aching in longing, whispering what-if questions into the void. But what they didn't understand is that pain, while paralyzing at first, becomes a forge in the hands of someone ready to heal. And that's what you did. You stepped into that fire. You sat in the loneliness. You faced the gut-wrenching silence. You relived the last conversation 1,000 times until it no longer owned you. Because that's the truth of healing. It doesn't start with forgetting them. It starts with remembering you. You began to reclaim yourself. Slowly, tenderly, like learning how to walk again after years of crawling. And the process wasn't graceful, it was raw. Some days you woke up with your chest tight and tears waiting just beneath your eyelids. Some nights you lay awake wondering how love could have felt so real for you and yet so disposable to them. But with each breath you released a little more. With each sunrise you felt the weight lessen. With each decision to focus inward, to read, to journal, to breathe instead of beg, you shifted. And that shift wasn't performative. You weren't trying to post your progress or prove your worth to anyone else. You weren't healing to make them jealous. You were healing because you could no longer live at the mercy of their absence. You were choosing peace over performance. And in the stillness of that choice, something powerful happened. You stopped asking why they didn't love you right and started asking why you kept accepting less than you needed. That question became the turning point, Because when the fog of pain starts to lift, you don't see them more clearly. You see yourself. You see the ways you silenced your own needs to keep the peace. You see the compromises that became self-erasure. You see how often you confused crumbs for love because you were afraid of asking for too much. And you realize your pain wasn't weakness. It was the moment your inner compass started screaming for alignment. And now they can't recognize you. They hear about you through friends. They check your feed and see someone radiant, composed, evolving. But they don't see the nights that built that glow. They don't know the breakdowns that led to this breakthrough. Because growth isn't visible in real time. It's subtle, stoic, earned in quiet hours of reflection. And now that you've outgrown the story they left you in, they feel the shift. They reach out with vague messages. They linger in your digital shadow. They project curiosity masked as concern. But it's not because they want to grow with you. It's because they expected you to remain wounded. And that expectation is now haunting them. Because when someone leaves you thinking you'll always need them, what shatters them most is watching you rise without their validation. That's the power of Stoicism. It teaches you that healing isn't about revenge, it's about reintegration. You didn't move on to get back at them. You moved on because you remembered your wholeness. And in Stoic relationships, love is only real when it's mutual, when it honors, not erases, the self. They underestimated your capacity to evolve. They saw you as fragile, but you were fertile ground for transformation. And that's the sting. They can't reach who you've become, not because you're hiding, but because they stayed behind while you walked forward. Now you carry yourself differently. You laugh with depth, you listen to your intuition, you build boundaries without apology. You've become fluent in your own needs, and fluent too in who cannot meet them. And while they may still be chasing attention, chasing drama, chasing temporary highs to mask their own emptiness, you're chasing nothing. You're just living, intentionally, mindfully, freely. That difference terrifies them, because it means they weren't essential. It means the power they thought they had was an illusion you allowed for too long, and now you're no longer available to be misunderstood. That version of you who stayed up waiting, who kept rereading texts looking for meaning, who questioned her worth every time they pulled away, that version has been laid to rest. And in her place stands a woman reborn through truth. You didn't outgrow the pain overnight. It was a slow burn, but burn it did. And from those ashes rose a clarity so profound, it rewrote your entire approach to love. No longer do you crave intensity that costs your peace. No longer do you romanticize confusion. You want clarity, reciprocity, emotional depth. And because of that, you've become selective, not guarded, but wise. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer beg, you discern. And if someone cannot meet you where you are, you don't shrink, you step aside. That's what growth does. It teaches you not just how to heal, but how to protect that healing. And now, their messages don't spark hope, they spark reflection. You see their name and remember how far you've come. You feel nothing but gratitude for the lesson, for the release, for the quiet evolution that happened when you stopped needing their permission to rise. That's what they didn't expect. Not just that you would move on, but that you would transcend the version of yourself they were most comfortable with. They don't know how to connect with who you've become because they never took the time to know you when it mattered. And now you don't need to explain it. You don't need to prove it. You're simply living it. And in doing so, you embody everything they failed to cherish. This is what it means to turn pain into purpose. To look heartbreak in the eye and say, you don't get to define me. Because in Stoicism, the deepest strength comes not from suppressing emotion, but from mastering it. You didn't deny the pain. You met it fully. You let it teach you, shape you, strengthen you. And now, it no longer holds you. You hold it with perspective, with reverence, with wisdom. And that, above all, is what they can't understand. Because they never did the work, they never sat in the fire, they never faced the mirror, they took the shortcut, and in doing so missed the transformation. But you didn't, you stayed. You stayed with yourself when no one else did. And that staying, that loyalty to your own healing, is what makes you unstoppable now. 4. You let go, and that's what finally broke them. They always thought you'd hold on, that no matter how far they pushed, no matter how little they gave, no matter how deeply they hurt you, you'd be right there, waiting, hoping, giving them one more chance. You see, people who are used to being the center of your emotional gravity believe you'll orbit them forever. They get so comfortable with your forgiveness, your explanations, your resilience, that they start to believe it's endless. They mistake your loyalty for a lack of options, your commitment for dependence. And so they test you, intentionally or not, just to see how far they can go before you break. But what they never expect is that one day you simply won't break. You'll let go quietly, without a speech, without a scene, without a dramatic ending, just gone. And that moment, the one where they finally look up and realize you're not there anymore, that's what shatters them, because they never believed you had the strength to stop trying. They thought the emotional rope you kept tying between the two of you would always stretch, but never snap. But you did something different this time. You stopped proving your worth to someone who never took the time to see it, and that's what they never saw coming. In Stoic relationships, there is no final blowout. There is no theatrical exit. There's a calm, collected decision to no longer tolerate what steals your peace. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left to save yourself. You stopped reaching, not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much for someone who never reached back. You stopped explaining, not because you didn't want to be understood, but because you realized they were never really listening. And in that silence, in that pulling away, the dynamic shifted forever. Because for the first time, they felt your absence. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, deeply. They felt the void where your patience used to be. They noticed the silence where your comfort used to echo. And it wasn't just that you left, it was how you left. You didn't storm out, you simply stopped showing up. And that unspoken goodbye, that unannounced ending, that's what lives in their mind now, because there's no closure in silence, only reflection. And now, that reflection haunts them. They begin to question the moments they once dismissed, the texts they ignored, the calls they declined, the effort they took for granted, and the worst part for them, it's realizing that the person who once would have done anything to stay no longer wants to return. That realization breaks them, not because they lost someone to anger, but because they lost someone to indifference. Stoicism teaches that letting go isn't passive, it's an act of courage, of clarity, of reclaiming your center. You didn't stop loving them because you ran out of love. You stopped because it was being poured into a black hole of emotional irresponsibility. You realized you were more loyal to the relationship than they were to your well-being. And when that truth sunk in, something shifted inside you. Not a hardening, but a grounding, a calm realization that love should never come at the cost of self-respect. And from that moment, you started the process of detachment, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. And they felt it, not all at once, but slowly, like a room getting colder without knowing why, like a conversation growing shorter, like laughter that stops feeling natural, until one day they realize they're alone. Not because you disappeared overnight, but because you stopped fighting to stay where you were never truly held. That's what they can't escape. The memory of you, not the one who chased, but the one who changed, the one who woke up, the one who stopped waiting for potential and started honoring reality. And that version of you, that version scares them, because it's a version they can't control, can't predict, can't manipulate with false promises or vague apologies. You've become a closed door, not out of bitterness, but out of boundaries. And in the quiet of that door remaining shut, they're forced to face themselves. And that's what truly breaks them. Not losing you, but being left alone with the consequences of their own choices. They thought love was a game they controlled, a power dynamic they could exploit. But Stoic relationships don't play by those rules. They teach that love without respect is unsustainable, and affection without reciprocity is an illusion. You honored that truth. You let go with grace. And that grace now wraps around your life like a shield. You no longer internalize their neglect as your fault. You no longer see your departure as failure. You see it as liberation. And they see it too, but it's too late. Because the person who left wasn't seeking revenge, they were seeking peace. And that peace is now yours. It glows in your decisions. It radiates in your stillness. It whispers in your confidence. And as they sit in the silence you left behind, scrolling through old conversations, replaying moments they once dismissed, they feel the full weight of what they let slip through their fingers. And maybe, in some distant thought, they hope for a second chance. But you're not walking backward. You're not repeating cycles. You're not available to re-enter a space that once required you to shrink. And if you've ever been here, if you've ever felt that final break inside, the one that ends not with drama but with quiet resolve, then you understand. You understand that letting go doesn't mean you never loved. It means you finally loved yourself enough to stop suffering. And if this truth speaks to your soul, if you felt yourself in this story, like and comment #1 below to share that resonance. And subscribe if you're ready to keep walking this path of strength, clarity, and stoicism. There's more to come, and your healing is just getting started. 5. They realized too late you were their safe place. There is a tragic irony in how people only recognize the value of something after it's gone, especially when that something is not a thing but a person who brought peace, who brought consistency, who brought unconditional presence. In a world full of chaos, they thought they needed excitement, mystery, passion that bordered on chaos. They mistook drama for depth and inconsistency for emotional challenge. And in that pursuit, they overlooked you, the one who brought a kind of peace that required no explanation, the one who made safety look effortless, the one who gave without keeping score. You didn't ask for much. You didn't need grand gestures or declarations. What you needed, what you offered, was something most people are not ready to recognize until they lose it. Emotional security. The space to be without performing, to feel without judgment, to speak without fear. And you gave that over and over, in small ways, in big ways, in ways they never even noticed. You were the one they could turn to when the world got too loud. You were the voice of calm in the storm, the gentle hand when they were overwhelmed. And they took that for granted. They thought your love was quiet because it was weak. They mistook your emotional maturity for simplicity. They saw your consistency as something boring, something too easy, something always available. But that's the thing about safety. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for recognition. It just is, until it isn't. Until one day it's gone, and they're left surrounded by noise, by superficial connections, by people who want their attention, but not their heart, by moments that feel exciting but never fulfilling. And suddenly they remember what you brought. The stillness, the depth, the rare feeling of being seen without having to perform. That's when the realization hits them, not just that you were kind or generous or reliable, but that you were home. That you were the soft place they never had to earn, the grounding force they never had to fight for. In Stoic relationships, safety is not just about physical presence. It's about emotional clarity. It's about knowing that someone is not trying to fix you, change you, or use you. They're simply showing up fully, honestly, consistently. You did that. And now they look around and realize they don't have that anymore. What they have are texts that go unanswered, conversations that feel transactional, connections that lack soul. And in that contrast, they finally understand what you meant. They see it in the way no one else listens the way you did. No one else remembers the little things the way you did. No one else cares about the details that make them feel human, whole, loved. And this isn't about being irreplaceable as a point of pride. It's about the truth that real connection is rare. And when it's gone, it leaves a silence louder than any argument. They try to go back to their old ways, to the distractions, the temporary highs, the validation hits, but none of it works, because once you've experienced safety, everything else feels shallow, and now they crave it. Not in general, in you. They crave the way you asked how their day was, not out of habit, but because you genuinely wanted to know. They crave the way you remembered their fears and held them gently instead of dismissing them. They crave the quiet trust that you never weaponized their vulnerability, and they can't get it back, because safety, once violated, doesn't return easily. You were open, you were trusting, you were emotionally generous, and they didn't protect that. They didn't recognize that what you were giving wasn't common, it was sacred. And now they're surrounded by people who are interesting but not intimate, engaging but not grounded. And that gap, that absence, it's you. It's your energy. It's your peace. And it's not something they can recreate. Because what you offered wasn't a performance. It was who you are. And they didn't meet it with presence. They met it with assumption, with entitlement, with the arrogance that you would always be there. And now your absence exposes everything they ignored. This is the part Stoicism prepares us for, the understanding that you can do everything right, give everything honestly, love someone fully, and still not be appreciated. But it's not about becoming bitter. It's about becoming better at choosing who deserves your peace. They didn't see your emotional depth as valuable until they were surrounded by shallow waters. They didn't understand your patience until they were met with impatience. They didn't know what presence felt like until it was replaced with disinterest. And that is the punishment. Not one you gave them, but one they created through their own neglect. Because in the end, the quiet pain of losing a safe place is the most haunting. They remember the way you listened without trying to solve, the way you stayed calm when they were spiraling, the way you supported without asking for anything in return, and they know, deep down, they won't find that again easily. Because people like you are not common. People who love from a centered place, from a place of grounded emotional integrity, are not loud, but they are unforgettable. And now, you're unforgettable not because of the drama you created, but because of the drama you never brought. You were their peace, and now they're restless. You were their balance, and now they're unsteady. You were their calm, and now they're overwhelmed. And all they can do is sit in that realization that they had everything they needed, and they traded it for something louder, flashier, easier to consume, but impossible to hold on to. And if there's one lesson to carry from this, it's that your peace is precious. Your emotional generosity is not something to be given recklessly. Stoicism teaches that we are the gatekeepers of our inner world. And you've learned that lesson, not in theory, but in practice. You gave peace, and it was mishandled. So now, you protect it. You choose more wisely. You offer less to those who cannot hold it, and that isn't punishment, that's wisdom. They didn't realize what you were until the quiet became deafening. But you already knew. And now you walk in that knowledge, not bitter, just boundaried, not angry, just aware. You are no longer a safe place for those who treated your safety as a given. You are a sanctuary for yourself now. And in that sanctuary, no chaos can enter without permission. 6. They felt nothing until you were gone. There's a cruel truth that some people only feel your value when you're no longer around to give it. They didn't feel the weight of your presence when you were there because they were too familiar with it. They had grown used to the sound of your voice, the rhythm of your check-ins, the comfort of knowing someone was always there on the other end of the phone. They mistook your presence for permanence, and because of that, they treated it like a background hum, reliable, ignorable, always available. You loved them not loudly, but deeply. You didn't love for applause, you loved for real. And that kind of love isn't always flashy. It's in the details, the way you remembered their bad days, the way you showed up even when you were tired, the way you gave parts of yourself they never had to earn. But they didn't feel that love the way you did. They didn't sit with its full meaning. They didn't realize what it meant to be chosen over and over until the day came when they were no longer chosen at all. That's when the emptiness started to echo. Not in the big dramatic moments, but in the small, quiet absences. You weren't there to send that good morning message. You weren't around to listen when the world got heavy. You didn't show up with a soft word when their own silence swallowed them. And they started to notice not just that you were gone, but that something was missing from their life, something grounding, something real. The silence wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of warmth, of care, of you. And this wasn't a sudden realization, it was a slow unfolding. Days turned into weeks, and still no message from you. They kept waiting, expecting the pattern to resume. They thought you'd reach out eventually. You always had. But this time, nothing came. And in that nothing, their own emptiness grew. Because what they thought was just space was actually finality. Your absence became the mirror they had avoided for so long. It reflected everything they had ignored. The way they had treated your effort like an obligation, the way they had dismissed your vulnerability, the way they had refused to meet your emotional depth. And now, without you, they feel every inch of that. They scroll through your old texts, rereading the love they never fully appreciated. They look at photos and remember a version of you that no longer exists, because you've moved on, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, mentally. You are no longer in the place they left you. You are no longer that person hoping they'd wake up and finally understand. And that's the part they can't undo. Because you didn't leave with a bang. You left with quiet strength. And Stoicism teaches us that the most powerful changes often happen in silence. You didn't need to announce your departure. Your absence said everything. You didn't need to justify your exit. Your peace was proof enough. Now they live with the realization that they had something rare and let it go. Not because they had to, but because they thought it would always be there. They confused stability for stagnancy. They mistook your devotion for lack of boundaries. And now they are searching for pieces of you in places that can never replicate the whole. Because you weren't just a person, you were a presence, a space of safety, honesty, and unwavering love. And that kind of energy doesn't just reappear. It has to be earned, nurtured, cherished. And they never did that. They coasted while you carried. They took while you gave, and they assumed you'd never leave because you stayed through so much. But even the strongest hearts have limits. Even the most patient souls get tired. And yours did. You didn't rage, you didn't beg, you didn't explain. You just stopped. And in that stopping, they finally started to feel the regret, feel the guilt, feel the hollowness of what they once called a relationship. And that's when they began to understand the truth they never wanted to face. They were emotionally asleep while you were wide awake. And now, they are haunted by everything they ignored. This is the power of Stoic relationships, not in how loudly they declare their boundaries, but in how deeply they honor their worth. You didn't demand to be seen. You simply walked away when you were no longer recognized, and now they see you everywhere, in songs, in smells, in moments that used to mean nothing but now mean everything. You're a ghost in their day-to-day, not because you want to be, but because they can't let go of what they never truly held. And you're not haunted. You're healed. You're not clinging to the past. You're creating your future. And that future doesn't include being overlooked. That future doesn't require begging for love. That future is rooted in Stoicism, in strength, in the clarity of knowing that your worth does not rise or fall based on someone else's ability to see it. So now, as they lie awake at night wondering if they still cross your mind, they don't realize the irony. You don't wonder anymore. You remember, you reflect, but you don't return because you've already walked through that fire. You've already found the ashes, and from those ashes, you've built something new, something whole, something sacred. And that's the final truth they must face alone. While they're just beginning to feel the loss, you've already turned it into liberation. If this resonates, if you've walked this path too, like and comment #1 below to share your story. And subscribe if you're ready to keep embracing Stoic clarity and self-worth with every step forward. This journey isn't about who left you, it's about who you're becoming. You didn't rise from heartbreak with a roar. You rose in silence, in stillness, in strength. They didn't care when you left because they never imagined your absence would be final. They thought you would return, that your love would outlast. Their neglect, that your loyalty would override your self-respect. But you chose something different. You chose dignity over desperation. You chose clarity over confusion. And while they scroll through memories trying to find the version of you that stayed, you're no longer there. That version no longer exists. You've grown beyond the reach of their regret, because real healing is not loud. It is steady, stoic, unstoppable. You no longer chase what does not nurture your soul. You no longer offer peace to those who turn it into entitlement. You no longer define your worth by how hard you can hold on, but by how wisely you let go. And in that letting go, you discovered the power that was never in their hands. It was always in yours. You are not the echo of who they failed to cherish. You are the author of your next chapter, one written with truth, with boundaries, with purpose. This is the art of Stoic relationships, not to live without love, but to love with discernment. To give freely but not foolishly, to feel deeply but never at the cost of yourself. This is your moment to walk forward, not in bitterness, but in brilliance. Not in silence born of suppression, but in silence born of knowing. You were never too much. You were simply too real for someone who mistook your presence for permanence. And now, as you move ahead, untethered and unburdened, remember this. Your peace is not a privilege for others to enjoy. It is a standard, one you carry into every room, every choice, every connection from this moment on. You didn't just leave, you elevated, and that's what they'll never be able to reach again.